It's obviously a character-building exercise being in the last session of a two-day conference. It's a bit like being Elizabeth Taylor's 12th or 13th husband. You know what's expected, you're just not sure how to make it interesting enough to keep everyone's attention. But we'll give it a go because we have three extremely good talkers on this matter and people who've got plenty of skin in the media and comms game. Could you please welcome, firstly, a blogger extraordinaire, a woman who has turned what some might regard as a hobby into virtually a full-time gig. Kylie Stretton, come on down from Charters Towers in Queensland. I feel as though I know Kylie quite a lot. We're Facebook and Twitter buddies, but this is the first time we've ever met face to face, isn't it?
That is.
It is. Please take any chair you like, Kylie. Second off the rank is Samantha Townsend, who is the rural writer for the Daily Telegraph, for the News Corporation. From the Daily Telly is obviously a Sydney paper, but Sam is based on the mid-north coast of New South Wales at the evocatively named Crescent Head. Good to see you, Sam. And last but certainly not least is Alex boss Alison Penfold, who is a stand-in for Simon Talbot from the NFF, who was to have joined us on stage, but he has some matters that he has to attend to down south. So welcome aboard, Alison. You probably needed another talking engagement like root canal therapy, but there you go. So look, I'm going to abandon the lectern and take up the chat position, and we'll get into it. Incidentally, we are tweeting and Facebooking and doing things on a hashtag LIVEXchange. So if you'd like to take photos or take copious notes and tweet to the people who unfortunately can't be with us, feel free to do that. I'll move over here to the area. Now, Alison, one of the questions that I had for Simon was that given his food strategy, marketing stroke advertising background, before he took over the top job at the NFF, it must have occurred to him from time to time that the live export industry really needed a pretty slick advertising or rebranding campaign over the past few years. Would that be a fair assessment of where the industry was?
I think the industry probably needed a lot of things, and probably one of them was certainly a rethink and a relook at how it communicated. From research work that the industry has done, there was a view that there was a veil of secrecy, that the practices of the industry was hidden, and to an extent I guess they felt deliberately so, given the events that occurred in 2011. But what our research has also shown is that the community doesn't want us to do a slick advertising campaign. They want us to be real. They want us to be genuine. They want to share the story that the industry has to tell. When we've done work with the community and taken them on a journey from where we were and where we are now, it's fascinating to watch people that start off very negative and see them after quite an intensive period of a couple of hours, positive about the industry. So, so I think, we have come a long way. I'm sure there are some that, see value in a slick advertising campaign. We know what we're up against. Apparently the billboard campaign that Animals Australia is running, that's cost them $14 million. That's a lot of money for a small industry that, in relative terms, in terms of the Peak Council to spend. But I think social media offers us other means to get our message out.
And there's other parts of the mainstream media that probably haven't touched any of the stories, any of the good stories, and even some of the bad stories, but there's a whole section, Samantha Townsend, of the mainstream media for whom this is a bit of a dark art, live exports. They haven't had a window into it at any stage, have they?
No, well, they haven't, and this is the first time that I've been up here to actually see what's, going to a station, seeing a depot. It's the first time that Alex, an industry has actually contacted me, and I was writing at the time of the ban, but they're not alone. All industries, and there's many of you here, you don't contact us about your stories. I'm always chasing you. You know, we're not the big bad media in Sydney, and we're not here to stitch you up. We want to tell your stories. We want to tell positive stories about the industry. And in the last couple of days, I've seen plenty of them, and I'm going to go back home and tell my 1.2 million readers, you know, some of the good things that you're doing up here, that you're not, you know, it's not like it was in 2011.
We're going to tease through some possible avenues and some possible new platforms for storytelling, because it's certainly occurred to me since I've stepped out of a rather active role in public broadcasting that there are some other avenues, and perhaps to a certain extent the criticism, if there is one of this industry, is that it has tended to preach to the converted. They've felt comfortable and spoken to people in specialist newspapers, magazines and programs, and I'd probably have to include the Landline program in that, and the Country Hour, and they've felt reasonably comfortable because they've understood that there was a degree of livestock industry literacy, and it is, I guess, an ability to tell the story to some new players that's very important. Now, one of the things that struck me that 2011 achieved, if nothing else, was a national conversation about what it is to be a farmer in the early part of the 21st century in this country. And Kylie Stretton, it obviously occurred to you that at that stage people for the first time were talking about the social licence to farm.
Yeah.
And that really pricked your ears up.
That did. There was a few people before 2011. There weren't a great deal of people out there talking about farming, and all of a sudden we've had this massive explosion of people, you know, the grassroots talking, and the grassroots talking is what's going to get those stories out there. It's going to get our support, but the grassroots can't keep talking unless we're getting industry support either. We need to be backed up with facts, information, you know, say you're on the right track, because, you know, we are putting our families out there in the firing line. You know, we're using our own resources. Many of you may have heard about the data drought at the moment, and that's really putting a huge impact on our grassroots stories, because we simply do not have the internet capacity at the moment to even get those stories out there, because rural internet is just ridiculous at the moment. So, like, we were trying to get the stories out there, but a lot of us are also starting to burn out. We're getting tired. We need to get more people doing it and a bit more support from industry bodies and, you know, just higher ups as well.
It's a good point you make about fatigue, because many of your opponents, of course, are as serious as a heart attack about this stuff, and they seem to be powered by a force probably from another galaxy, but they just seem to reproduce, or they seem to find the people who find the time to keep up.
Well,
and as Dane said, it can be very, very wearing when you're mounting a campaign.
Yeah.
You do hit the wall.
Animals Australia, a couple of years ago, they advertised for their social media campaigner, and they were getting paid, I think, $60,000 a year. Now, I've got to try and do all my social media stuff, run a business, 2 farms, I have an off-farm income and a family. So it gets really tiring on everyone. And like I said, it has to be grassroots. We do it because we love it and we're passionate and we want to share our stories, but the fatigue will set in very soon if we don't get a concerted campaign together.
And look, Alison, to a certain extent, the industry bodies themselves weren't actually flush with warm bodies on the ground to tell these stories either. I mean, it was essentially until recently people like you.
Well, I mean, I'm, you know, very grateful to the members of ALEC that have recently injected through a voluntary levy a commitment to support additional resources for ALEC, and having now a full-time communications and media manager. We are still now the only peak council in the entire red meat sector that has a full-time communications and media manager. You know, so, and I know the sort of work that Kylie's doing and others that are operating on social media, and it's an incredible platform that I have, with a lot of grace from Kylie, taken advantage of, and Shane, of course, as well. But now that we've got, you know, a full-time resource, you know, Tom's job, and Tom's here today, he's walking up the back now, you know, his job every day is to get up and say, what story can I tell about the trade tomorrow? What can I plan to tell next week? What content can I generate, you know, journo, have a conversation with Sam and other journos, reach out just beyond just rural media where we feel comfortable. I mean, we need to engage with the rural audience because we need advocates, we need to feed the people that support the industry, but we've got to create messages and content to reach out beyond that and have that conversation with, Dane said, that middle ground, that 80%. But until only of the last month, really, it is like Kylie, whilst I don't have a family and 2 farms, or a cat or a dog. I mean, it's a full-time job working at CO ALEC, doing everything that needed to be done, and it just wasn't possible. You need to have a dedicated, you've got to start with a dedicated resource. It's only a starting point, it's not an end point in terms of us being able to tell the story of live exports in a really genuine, honest and open way.
Look, Sam touched on it. It's quite interesting, and having spent 35 years in this space and dealing with some of the people that Sam is now working with, agriculture is very, per se, is very reticent about opening up to the wider media mainstream, and like big organisations and long-established industries, and we won't need to identify any of them in particular, but just say the wool industry. I mean, it's like a secret cult trying to get information out of some of these people, and if you do find a half-reasonable story, they sort of are very loath to want to give you any assistance or heads up whatsoever. Do you find that in the early part of the 21st century somewhat baffling? Because they actually do employ people on 6-figure salaries who are supposed to do that sort of work.
Exactly, and the thing is, it's funny, you go to farms, and I've been doing this 10 years, and you go to them and you say, oh, I want to tell your story, it's great, you have a fantastic thing to say, and they go, no, mate, my mate's going to pay me out if I'm in the paper, they're going to take the piss out of me. It's like, well, you know what, if you don't promote your industry, someone else is going to, like the animal rights groups are going to come in, and you've got, like, just for an example, just on the social media, the 2 peak bodies here today have a collective of maybe 1,400 followers on Twitter. Your biggest critics have over 615,000. So they've got obviously a massive audience. So when you've got people like me who wants, I'm genuinely wanting to tell your story. If I'm going to stitch you up, I'll tell you I'm going to stitch you up. And I think that's really important to get that message out. Stop having that mentality about, where, oh, my mate's going to give me a hard time if I tell it. You're the best promoters of your industry. You're the best people to tell your story.
What sort of stories would the Daily Telegraph, in an agricultural sense, farming and rural and regional, what sort of stories spin their wheels? What things can you sell to an editor with some confidence that he's not going to say, forget it?
We just had a couple of successful campaigns. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with New South Wales, but we've had a Wear for the Bush drought appeal. Which, obviously Queensland's in a bad drought, New South Wales in the west corners in a bad drought. So we decided to say, hey, let's help our farmers. So we ran this appeal. We've raised more than $3 million, and that was turned into food and fodder vouchers. So we organised a convoy of hay from Corowa in the south of New South Wales to Walgett, one of the drought battlefronts. And we followed that journey. We had our cartoonist Warren Brown, who's one of Australia's best cartoonists. He followed the journey, and he documented that all the way along. And the fact that $3 million from our readers to help farmers, what more can you get? Like, yes, it's not going to save the drought. It's not, but it's as farmers said, it's a symbol that those people on the east of us of the Great Divide, they give a damn. We took the hay there, and whilst they only got 4 bales of hay, and they travelled the half-ton hay, they travelled 400 kilometres in a round trip for this hay. I had this old fella to go up there, go up to the hay, feel it, sniff it, and he said, "That's bloody good stuff, thanks, mate." So that campaign ran for a year. We've had another campaign, Get Off Our Backs, over the mulesing debate in 2009, give farmers a chance to come up with alternatives. So we told the people for ethical treatment of animals, we said, back off, give them a chance. So we ran it, we ran on the front page of the Daily Telegraph and some of our other sister papers in other states. We had a model in some wool, and basically we enlisted our own celebrities to tell these animal rights groups to back off. So we had Alex Perry, Nathan Hindmarsh. Alex uses wool in his products. We had Jason Brunston, and we had some models. So that cuts through to our audience because they see these images of mulesing, and they're pretty graphic, like similar to what you guys are facing. And they, we gave Betty Blacktown a chance to see, well, farmers aren't bad. This is why they do it. Would you like to see a fly-blown sheep, or would you like to see a healthy animal?
Yeah, look, and I think the interesting thing, and it's something that I've sort of come to consider a lot more acutely in the last 12 months than I probably did for the previous 35 years, is that the commercial mainstream media can mobilise that sort of horsepower pretty quickly. And they're also, of course, unencumbered by the rules that apply to public broadcasters. I mean, it takes an Act of Parliament now for a lot of ABC programs to sort of get outside the metropolitan area, and there are very, very, very strict guidelines about what sort of assistance they can receive from organisations such as, ALEC or LiveCorp. So it's a very big country, and your principal markets are offshore. Now, in the course of my time in that space, we made maybe 4 or 5 forays into some of your key markets. Now, these people have the capacity, an organisation like News Corporation, even as cash-strapped as it appears, Fairfax Rural Media, they're in a much better position to be able to combine, take assistance, whatever you like, be facilitated by. And that's before you even look at programs like the breakfast programs, like the Sunday night program on 7, 60 Minutes, which you're probably well aware about. But what about things like the Women's Weekly? Like they're all content hungry, and they're all after really good, solid, authentic Australian stories. You probably notice just about every Saturday, the Weekend Australian makes a real solid effort to try and get a story from the heartland on that front page with a big, dominating photo. They're after ideas all the time, and the magazines that also go with that. I've left myself nothing else to say. Yes, I have. Kylie, you're interacting with all these people who are in your space, but you're also now, through your Ask Any Farmer tweet and blog, you're connecting with a whole lot of what we would regard as, average Australians now, and helping in that education process. Were you surprised at the sort of the level of the feedback that you were getting and the take-up of what you had to say?
Yeah, this year's actually seen some really big figures. We are a group of volunteers. We're all juggling 1,000 things. And at the beginning of the year, for some reason, we started reaching close to 1 million people. We only have 15,000 followers, but we were getting a reach of 1 million people around the world. Just a couple of weeks ago, I think, hit up to 400,000 people, and we'd been really quiet because we were just all so busy. So if we can do this without any knowledge, not inside knowledge, we're just trying to pull stuff off the news and stuff off other farmers. If we see something interesting on Facebook, we say, can we use that? And we don't have a dedicated team, we don't have experience, we don't have qualifications. So if we're getting this, and the appeal is we are grassroots and we are not, we are independent, we're not bought by any industry body or anything. So I sometimes think if we can have that massive reach, what could we do if we had better resources?
Well, it's interesting you should mention better resources, because I was at the Ag4 State Conference in Cloncurry a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking with a young woman who lives just outside Gympie on a relatively small block just outside Gympie, and she has just recently partnered with AgForce in Queensland, and her Twitter and website handle is Stay at Home Mum. Now, you probably, some of you may have come across it. If you haven't, it was a revelation for me because, to be honest, it's a long while since we had a stay-at-home mum at my place. But she started off, and the simple premise of it was she was laid off from her job and almost straight away fell pregnant with 2 kids thanks to IVF. So she had a bit going on at home, and she actually just decided to tell that story. And as we were talking, and she was talking her way through it, she said, you know, I started to appeal to a few people, as Kylie has said. And the remarkable thing about it is it actually grew exponentially to an extent that she could never have imagined. Like, it started off in the hundreds, then the thousands, then the tens of thousands. She's now getting 6 million discrete hits on her website and her blogs. And the business, it's now turned into a business, is making millions of dollars, and she employs another 15 stay-at-home mums to tell these stories. She would not have imagined in her wildest dreams that that was going to be possible. So in a sense, Alison, you've got to start to connect with people like that to tell that story. Because fortunately, she eats red meat.
Yeah, and look, I think, you know, today, listening to particularly, Dane's presentation, it's a bit of a wake-up call. I think I had thought that we were getting somewhere down the road to cutting through. Dane reminds me that we're probably back at the starting point, and that we're going to have to really lift our game if we're going to connect with that 80%. And I think, the challenge for Peak Council is, how do we cut through, when it's a shiny bum like me sitting in Canberra telling a story. I mean, how real am I to Betty Blacktown or Mrs. Stringbag? I'm not. I don't have street credibility. Kylie has street credibility, and Kylie's story told through the Daily Telegraph has street credibility. So, I think for all of us, we've got to find how our message fits in with the context in which we're operating, because there's a certain story that I can tell and Alec can tell, and I think that there's another level down as a story that Alec members, the exporters, the producer members, the transport companies, who are all part of the Alec family, they can tell their story. And then it's working with Kylie, and at another level to the one that we've probably worked at now as to how we can help Kylie and the team around her to have content, to have information. That is that genuine story. I've been called the master of spin, and I've been called worse, but that's not what I've tried to be about. It is about trying to really just strip away a lot of the BS and just tell it how it is, good or bad. And so I hope that we can now, with the additional resource, do a better job as a Peak Council, because Christ, we need Peak Councils being better at communicating, but also be better at providing content to the likes of Sam and Kylie.
I think it's going to be really interesting with Jodie Allen from Stay at Home Mum. On Facebook alone, she's got 500,000 followers, which is nearly as much as Animals Australia. Now, Jodie has come on as AgForce's Friends of Ag campaign as their ambassador. So Jodie is now going to be reaching 500,000 women every time she speaks about agriculture and speaks about the positive bits of agriculture. Now, as we saw before on Murdoch University's survey, that a lot of these people that are having input and a say on how agriculture is run and animal welfare are women. Women more or less run the households. They buy the groceries. So if they don't feel comfortable about buying this food, they're not going to buy it. So we have to really reach the women. And I'm not being all feminist and everything, but a lot of you will know that if your wife says, this is what we're doing, this is what we're eating, this is what we feel, this is who we vote for, you do it. Happy wife, happy life. So we really, and they're not bogans, they're not greenies, we've just seen that they are highly educated people. We need to get to the heart of these women and give them the feel-goods that we are families, because what we've been putting forward a lot is industry, and we've got to cut that out and get back to families. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how AgForce go with this, because on the other side of the coin, we've got MLA, and they do a great job. They've been doing a great job with Target 100, but all their advertising campaigns are aimed at men. and sportsmen. At the moment, we've got the honey badger, who is, you know, Nick Cummings from rugby union. He's great. I think he's awesome. He's funny. But he doesn't get to the heart of women. Apparently you're better on beef, but women aren't going to eat and buy that beef unless they feel safe about it, unless they feel good about it. So MLA have got these wonderful ads overseas. They show beautiful landscapes, they show farming families, and they go to overseas. We need to show those farming families here, because without the producers, we do not have a product. And, you know, we have to get them to trust us first before they trust our product. And I think that's where we're really lacking. We're going for the big names and the big stars, but we're not giving people the feels.
And look, sometimes I think you try and over-egg the pudding. I think some of the simplest, some of the most effective stories are right in front of your face and you don't acknowledge it. Now, Sam and I were both on a recent conference of international journalists in Cairns, and one of the keynote speakers for that, it was Gary Cook, who's here from the Indigenous Land Corporation. And I've always thought and been absolutely staggered that not more has been done about it. Is that when you look at one of the real important drivers for this business, you look at where the live cattle industry operates in the context of Australia, across Northern Australia. Now, what is the one or two things that they have in common from Western Australia right through? They are, in many cases, the only game in town. They are a significant employer. They underpin those small, rural, regional and remote communities. But the one that always staggers me that not more is made of, they also have the potential to make an enormous difference in Indigenous communities. There is a skill set and there is an aptitude with cattle and horses and that environment and a knowledge that those people can bring to the business, which I think has been tremendously overlooked. And I think if you were trying to get waivers, if you were trying to work on Dane's 80%, that's a very simple story that you can tell people. Why is it important that this industry continue and that it, you know, survive and that it thrives? Because it actually can help underpin an industry in a place and employment and a lifestyle and a livelihood and a future in communities where there's not too many other things going for it. Did that strike you as a bit odd as well, that, you know, you were hearing a lot of those kinds of things? Your microphone.
Hear me?
Yeah, talk it up a bit.
Exactly, and like I came up here and I heard about the figures, the $3.40 for live weight, and that's great, and the numbers that are going overseas that are record. Betty Blacktown doesn't really associate with that. Some of the stories, just to give you an example, that I've found in the last couple of days, you know, obviously I'm up here to see how the industry is going, you know, since 2011 and what the changes were. I went to a station and, you know, looked at how they did it. I spoke to exporters, you know, looked at what they're doing that's different. But other stories were like, I invited Journo up here from anywhere, like the Women's Weekly, like, you know, Channel 7. You know, they have their morning program, like the, you know, where they cross live. Invite them up and do a muster, because Betty Blacktown would go, wow. I mean, and then they get the pictures and they tell the story, you know, and then they can talk about, you know, what's happening in the industry. There's the drover, the head stockman that's on a boat. He comes from New South Wales. He comes all the way up here to work. I mean, that's a great story to tell Betty Blacktown. You know, there's the blokes up the back with the global compliance who've got that scanning technology. First I've heard of it, and they're thinking about bringing it to New South Wales for the domestic market. That's another good story. I mean, it's not going to go in the mainstream news media, but it'll go in our business section, because that's, you know, that's innovative, and people want to know about that. I mean, we don't always want to write about negative stories, and you guys have got plenty of good ones. I'm sure everyone in this room has some sort of story to tell. You might not think so, but just, you know, come and see me, like, or email me. I'm samantha.townsend@news.com.au. And if you, I'll repeat that, samantha.townsend@news.com.au. If you, I mean, it may not be a story for us, but maybe I can point you in the right direction, or you know, we can work on something else.
The time has virtually beaten us, but look, we're going to be around. These professionals are going to be around tonight, so please follow it up with them, get their contact details, and, you know, I think Sam's right. It always struck me that it was a bit of a no-brainer. You had big characters, a terrific backdrop, and fundamentally some really good stories to tell. And it's most important when you do hit those hiccups and when, you know, the graphic images of wherever turn up. It's terrific to actually have a personal contact with people who can get the other side of the story. And get the other side of the story really quickly. Because there's one thing that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years with, you know, technology like this and other stuff, is that the news cycle has really sped up. And you can't really wait for a committee or a board of directors to have a meeting and decide what the form of words will be. You really need to respond to things, you know, immediately. So when they're looking for reaction to things, and sometimes it's going to, you know, it's going to rely on you, individual stakeholders, to actually tell those stories and right those wrongs and correct those misconceptions. Because this stuff now races at the speed of light, and bullshit travels faster than just about anything else. And if you want to head it off, you better get onto the same technology. You better use exactly the same weaponry that your opponents are using, and make it part of your whole overall, you know, strategy. Because as we've said, as everybody has said, and Dane mentioned it as well in his presentation, there is a big discussion going on about social licence. People want to be convinced that everything possible is being done to make this the best possible industry with the highest possible standards. And so you've got a bit of an insight into it from the blogging and the social media sense, from the professional journalism's and mainstream journalist sense. And, you know, like if anybody says that print is dead, you need to tell the 1.2 million readers of Sam's papers, and they still think it's a go. And of course, in terms of Alison's role with Alec, it's terrific that there's a few other people who have come around Alison. It means Secret Santa this year will be a lot more interesting than it's been in the last few years for you. And look, we just look forward, I think, to, you know, for those stories to come forward, for people to be prepared to share and open themselves a little bit more to that kind of, you know, scrutiny, if you like, but certainly being open to those kinds of ideas. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you thank our panellists, Kylie Stretton, Samantha Townsend and Alison Penfold for being part of it. And that means, Don, we're in the home stretch.